There to Tydeus' son Diomedes Pallas Athena granted strength and daring, that he might be conspicuous among all the Argives and win the glory of valor. She made weariless fire blaze from his shield and helmet, like that star of the waning summer who beyond all stars rises bathed in the ocean stream to glitter in brilliance. Such was the fire she made blaze from his head and his shoulders, and urged him into the middle fighting, where most were struggling. That's the beginning of Book 5 of the Iliad, page 128 if you have the Lattimore translation, and this is also the beginning of what's called the Aristeia of Diomedes. And this module is about a comparison between the Aristeia, both the specific one of Diomedes and more generally the basic concept of the Aristeia as a specific kind of epic storytelling. The comparison between that and what I call level grinding, which is a way of uniting a few slightly disparate concepts within the storytelling in adventure video games, in particular games that are called role-playing games, both of the single-player variety and of what's usually called the MMO, or the massively multiplayer online variety. And here in particular, we're going to be talking about games like RuneScape, but also the more famous World of Warcraft, and the one I know best, Lord of the Rings Online, from which some of my examples are going to be coming. Alright, so what is the Aristeia? The Aristeia literally means the excellence or the bestness, and it's always connected to an individual warrior at an individual moment in the storytelling of the Iliad, when all of a sudden that warrior, well, one way to put it is goes berserk. Another way to put it is granted by the gods, although one of my key contentions about the Iliad especially is that the role of the gods is not to actually intervene, but rather to reflect the human action. That is, to reflect here the great valor that Diomedes has. That warrior, in the course of the Aristeia, takes on a greater role and becomes the key warrior in the battle at that point, fights a number of enemies while various of his comrades are doing more usual types of fighting around him, and then eventually makes it to a very important battle against somebody who, from the perspective of a video game, would be called a boss. And thus the Aristeia ends with what, from the video game perspective, could be called a boss battle. And all of these things are things we'll be investigating as this lecture continues on. Now, there are three specific points I want to make about the Aristeia that we're going to be carrying forward to talk about the video game comparison. The first is that the backdrop of the Aristeia is the standard framework of what could probably best be called the battle books. That is, the long stretches of the Iliad in which we find hero after hero being slaughtered and slaughtering in turn in a kind of indiscriminate way and without apparently all that much of a forward narrative direction. And this seems like it must be the very most ancient and very most basic level of epic storytelling. And here is a pretty good example of what the battle books are like. Idomeneus killed Phaistos, the son of Maionion Boros, who had come out of Tarne with the deep soil. Idomeneus, the spear-renowned, stabbed this man just as he was mounting behind his horses with a long spear driven in the right shoulder. He dropped from the chariot, and the hateful darkness took hold of him. The henchmen of Idomeneus stripped the armor from Phaistos, while Menelaus, son of Atreus, killed with a sharp spear Strophios' son, a man of wisdom in the chase, Scamandrios, the fine huntsman of beasts. Artemis herself had taught him to strike down every wild thing that grows in the mountain forest. Yet Artemis of the showering arrows could not help him, no, nor the long spear casts in which he had been preeminent. But Menelaus, the spear-famed son of Atreus, stabbed him as he fled away before him in the back with a spear thrust between the shoulders and driven through to the chest beyond it. He dropped forward on his face, and his armor clattered upon him. And on and on. And one thing that's very notable about these battle book sections is the gore with which the heroes kill one another, and the very graphic descriptions. And I've read some that were not really all that graphic by comparison with many of them. We have things like people's eyeballs popping out and rolling in the dust in front of them, and warrior after warrior literally biting the dust, which is where that expression comes from. Now, against that backdrop comes the Aristeia. So point number one is that the Aristeia takes shape against a backdrop of very ancient, very simple, very rudimentary storytelling, which would have been a kind of baseline for the bards singing these stories to banquet halls full of warriors and warrior wannabes, very much the way standard action movie fare, or perhaps more importantly for our purposes, standard video game violent fare works, where a character in a video game kills enemy after enemy after enemy, and it doesn't seem like there's any end, and there doesn't seem like there's any kind of forward narrative motion. Well, it's the Aristeia that comes over the top of that when somebody like Diomedes gets the special power for the course of that Aristeia to go forward and do his thing as a warrior and show his quality.